3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country...
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
Desde mi punto de vista hay dos líneas que explican por qué la popularidad.
This is the voice of Javier Miel, a presidential candidate for the South American nation of Argentina. He has emerged as a leading candidate in the presidential race, but also a controversial one. In his appearance and background, he is certainly unorthodox. He has piercing blue eyes and a shaggy mane of brown hair. In his youth, he was a soccer goalie and a member of a Rolling Stones cover band before deciding to pursue a career in economics. This career has been a successful one, as he taught economics throughout the country, authored several books, and was featured heavily in media. Elected to the Argentine legislature in 2021, he currently leads the political coalition La Libertad Avanza, meaning liberty advances. And his strong stances against socialism and political corruption seem to be gaining ground. On September 14th, he appeared in an interview on X with Tucker Carlson and responded to a question about socialism.
I wonder if you believe that socialism, leftism, produces ugliness.
Esa es una primera caracterización de Argentina.
The issue is that Argentina began to embrace socialist ideas over 100 years ago. The analogy of frogs in a pot of water is useful here. When you turn up the heat slowly, the frogs don't realize it until the time comes. And when they try to jump out, it's too late. Argentina's embrace of socialist ideas began with an idea that seems attractive, but is actually a terrifying way to operate an economic system. The idea that where there is a need, there is a right. It's a problem because there can be infinite needs, but someone always has to pay for those rights, and the resources for that are finite. That sparks a conflict between infinite needs and finite resources. In the liberalist view, this conflict is easy to resolve through economic freedom and private property. Milei uses the term liberalist as it's understood in South America. We would equate his philosophy as something more akin to free market economics. So, what are Americans to make of this development in South America? On this episode of Heritage Explains, we feature a conversation between two of our heritage experts, both of the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. Victoria Coates, Vice President, sat down to interview Joseph Humire, visiting fellow for Latin America and the Caribbean, and find out what we should know about Argentina's presidential hopeful, Javier Miel.
I am Victoria Coates, delighted to join you for this episode of Heritage Explains, in which we will be looking at the upcoming October 22nd presidential election in Argentina. Joining me today is Joseph Humire, who is, among many other things, a visiting fellow here at the Heritage Foundation in the Davis Institute in the Allison Center for Foreign Policy. So it is a great pleasure to be able to tap a currently resident expert for information on this important topic. So, Joe, thank you so much for coming in and making the time for our Heritage listeners. And I just would like to ask you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background and why you're going to be talking to us about Argentina.
Absolutely. First of all, let me thank you, Victoria, for having me. Thank the Heritage Foundation. It's an honor to be a visiting fellow with the Allison Center. So a little background on me. I'm kind of like what you would call a soldier scholar. I was a Marine for 8 parts of the formative years of my adult life, left the Marine Corps, went into the foundations, and then moved into the think tank world. I started a think tank called the Center for a Secure Free Society, which is basically a research arm that focuses on a part of the world that most of Washington doesn't, which is Latin America and the Caribbean. But I gave it an even more unique focus, in that we focus on Latin American and the Caribbean in a geopolitical perspective, looking at external actors such as Russia, such as China, and such as Iran, which brings me to why we're going to talk about Argentina. So Argentina It's not a small country in Latin America. It's one of the biggest countries. It was actually one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America for much of its history. The last 50, 60 years have not been kind to Argentina. They've had serious issues with their economic performance, many debt defaults, and now inflation, and even say hyperinflation, as they reached over 100% for this year for the first time this century. Argentina has also been the victim of terrorism. They've had Iran has attacked the country on multiple occasions through its proxy Hezbollah. China is very active in Argentina as well. There's a colloquial saying for some of the Argentines because of the level of debt that Argentina is with the People's Republic of China, which is Argentina. And so China's big, Russia's big. So all the geopolitical actors that we look at from national security perspective here in the United States are very, very active in Argentina. So I think that's the reason why it's important.
No, and I do think that for many Americans who maybe were not hyper-focused on Latin America before, the issues that we're having with our southern border is making this a top-tier national security threat for America, and that also coming out of the pandemic and all the supply chain disruptions and the problems with China have made Americans look at our own backyard and say, what are we doing? Why aren't we a stronger presence here? Why is there so much Russia and China and Iran? And given my checkered past and background as an art historian, I was particularly interested in an AP article I saw today about an Argentinian artist who is literally using pesos, using their paper currency as a medium to create his artwork in a really interesting way of pointing out how something that had been so valuable was now valueless, but still a vehicle for the Argentinian people to express their creativity. And it is such a beautiful country and a wonderful people. Can you talk to us a little bit about how this hyperinflation happened and how it's manifesting itself for the people of Argentina?
What you just said, I think, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be amusing, right? That people use the currency.
Ironic. Yes.
It's ironic. And honestly, from the outside, we look at it, and it is kind of funny. We've seen this happen with other countries. We've seen it happen with Venezuela, and they would use their currency literally for toilet paper. We've seen it happen in other parts of the world, like Zimbabwe. But essentially, when inflation comes, and as Milton Friedman would say, inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. When inflation comes, it's really hard to cure. Because the fundamental root of inflation is a massive government spending. And this is what's happened in Argentina. I say you go back 100 years, since the Peronist era, 1946, when Juan Perón and Evita Perón took over, they basically introduced a sort of corporate welfare into the population and into the psyche of the Argentine government, which before to that was actually one of the most wealthiest countries in Latin America. It had a bonanza between the turn of the 1800s into the 1900s because it was one of the top agriculture exporters in the world. It has great fertile topsoil throughout the country. It still has great fertile topsoil throughout the country. They just haven't been able to capitalize on those resources because they've been mismanaging their economy. If you move into this current century, the 21st century, there's another phenomenon that hit Argentina over and above the Peronista legacy of corporate welfare, which is Kirchnerismo. And Kirchnerismo added another element that I think is even more damaging, which is the mass public spending, the welfare spending, the empowering the labor unions, all of that came from the Peronist movement as well. But they also introduced massive money laundering and public corruption. The figurehead of the Kirchnerismo movement, the former president, current vice president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, is indicted and convicted on counts of public corruption. She had multiple investigations, and late last year she was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison for stealing upwards of $1 billion from fake public work projects throughout the country when she was president. So this is part of the story of Argentina. The government has been looting from the people for probably about 100 years, and it's got incrementally worse. And then on top of that, they stopped paying their public debts, and that's put them in, with the international bondholders and the credit holders into a precarious situation. So that's what's manifesting today. The country now is pretty much untenable economically. People, whatever they earn that day, they spend it because they don't know how much it's going to be worth tomorrow. And then that introduces someone like Javier Miel, who's an economist. He wasn't a politician until very recently. He's somebody that not only taught and studied economics, he comes from a free market school of economics called the Austrian School of Economics, very prominent. I think everyone here at the Heritage Foundation knows that. But he was also worked in banks. He actually wasn't just a theorist. He was also a practitioner at looking at implementing macroeconomic policies through the banking system of Argentina.
Now, and this brings up, I think, our critical topic for today, which is the upcoming presidential election. Can you describe basically, the process that has vaulted Milei to a position of media prominence, even in the United States? We've seen his Twitter videos, and most recently his interview with Tucker Carlson. And if it got Tucker's attention enough to take him down to Argentina to do an in-person interview, I think we should all pay attention. And then the corollary to that, which is the very, very negative Economist cover story about how Milei is a terrible threat to Argentinian democracy. How did we get here?
Well, I'll talk about the Economist in a second, but the symbolism of what Argentina is relevant throughout the entire world, even in the United States. I mean, we're having our own problems with inflation here. So if we don't pay attention to what's happening in other countries, the same thing can happen into the United States. And so the fact that a country that's pretty much entering an economic abyss, I mean, hyperinflation has 100%. A few countries can claim that, unfortunately. The fact that an economist outsider comes into the political scene and not only wins a primary, but dominates. I mean, he took regions of Argentina that were previously in the stronghold of Peronist candidates or Kirchnerista candidates. He took it away from them and brought it back to the center-right in Argentina. Now, he is, I think, somebody that's now leading a charge. He's not the only candidate. There's 5 candidates that are going to be moving into the October 22nd first round of the elections. They had a primary in August, and I'm going to speak a little bit about the primary because it's a unique primary. I don't know if any other country in Latin America does this, but it's almost like the election before the election. It's held like a national referendum because it's a national vote. So the results of that primary very much are indicative of what could be the results of the October 22nd election, since it's only a matter of weeks away. And Javier Miel got more than 30%. If you listen to what he says he got 35%. He said they took 5% of his votes. Nonetheless, he's the front runner for this, and his momentum is in the upswing. Tucker Carlson going to Argentina, I think, is going to benefit him because the people of Argentina, they're not looking for structural, incremental, modest reforms to their economy. They're looking for radical change. And when you have a person that's talking about dollarizing the country, he may say things in an inflammatory way about, even dissolving the central bank. But if you look at the nuance of what he's proposing, there is some merit to it. I mentioned that he's not an experienced and a practicing economist. But if you think about just Argentina's history, their biggest period of growth, which happened in the late 1800s to the 1900s, pretty much from 1880 to 1930, they did that without the central bank. They grew because they had the power of their economy into the hands of the private sector. Since 1946, since Perón, that era, they've been shifting that more and more to the public sector. To today, 25% of the workforce in Argentina is in the public sector. That's outlandish. 1 of every 4 Argentinians is working for the government, which really isn't producing for the national economy. So I think that's what we're going to see. Touch really briefly on the Economist article. To me, this was kind of very bad journalism at best.
I would call it malfeasant.
Yeah, it is. It's journalist malpractice for sure, because I read the interview, which is a 3-hour interview. They transcribed it. It's about 56 pages. I read the entire thing looking for this nugget that shows that Javier Milei said something so outlandish that he has to be considered a threat to democracy, and I didn't find it. In fact, in several iterations, he says, I will always stand for democracy. They asked him about China. He said, look, China's a major creditor, major debtor to Argentina, but they're not a strategic ally for us because I can't stand with a country that doesn't stand for democracy, freedom, for peace. When they talked about Latin America, he said, I'm not going to sit down and have strategic conversations with governments that don't respect the will of their people, like Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela or Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. He was very clear on these points, and he repeats that I'm going to support democracy. He considers him part of the Westphalian democratic nation states. So I don't know where the Economist saw this other than just putting a headline on an article that really didn't, or an interview, better said, that didn't really capture the essence of that headline.
No, it was fascinating to me, and even in the United States, we occasionally have a politician who says hyperbolic things. It does happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a threat to democracy. So I was struck that the Economist was both going to elevate this kind of regional election to a cover story and then go after a particular candidate with this kind of vitriol.
Yeah.
And, God love him for doing the interview, but clearly it was a hit job from day one.
And it was weird in the sense that, The Economist has been complaining about Argentina's economy repeatedly over several episodes. And now you have a candidate, a political candidate, but is also an economist, someone that's now proposing some serious reforms. I thought they were going to talk about those reforms. Like, the economist is going to talk about what happens if you get rid of the central bank, what happens if you dollarize the country. I would say maybe 10% of that interview talked about it very much on the surface, and about 80% of the interview talked about, well, what do you think about this person? What do you think about that person? What do you think about January 6th in the United States? Things that really aren't relevant to the situation in Argentina. I thought Javier Miel, at least through the transcript, did a pretty good job at answering a lot of these questions, and I saw nothing in the slightest that saw that he was a threat to democracy. As a matter of fact, I think the biggest threat to democracy in Argentina is the government's addiction to public spending. I think that's the threat to democracy in the country.
No, I mean, clearly that is what is actually having such a detrimental effect on the Argentinian people's lives. And that brings me to maybe our most important question, which to some extent you've answered by pointing out how important Argentina is globally, but certainly for the Western Hemisphere, and what a very strong partner it was historically and could be in the future to the United States, which is why should the American people, American conservatives, heritage members, why should they care about what happens on October 22nd?
So that is the big question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. The first part you actually touched on, Victoria, earlier with the border. What everyone needs to understand about the southern border crisis that's happening right now, the 7 million plus illegal migrants that have crossed through in the last 5 or 6 years, is that is a symptom of bigger endemic problems that are happening all throughout the hemisphere, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. It started with Central America, then it was Haiti, now it's Venezuela. This is going further south. In big countries like Brazil and Argentina, if they continue to go further in this socialist trap, where do you think they're going to go? They're going to move north. And what's numbers of today of 2.7 million plus encounters and apprehension on the U.S. southern border, that's going to be an easy day compared to what we're going to see in years to come. So that's the first reason. You can't have a successful and prosperous and free country if you live in a horrible neighborhood. It's impossible. You could ask Chile this question in South America. They thought they were out of the woodwork, and now they have a socialist president, even though they've had the most successful free market reforms over the last half century. The second reason I would say is as part of the Northern Hemisphere, the United States, with our transatlantic alliances with NATO, we need to have Southern partners. We need to have Southern partners in South Asia. We need to have Southern partners in the Middle East, partners in Africa, and we need to have partners in Latin America. In that, we lost a strategic opportunity with Brazil. There was a tremendous opportunity with President Bolsonaro and President Trump to forge a strategic alliance over and above just a trade alliance or a military alliance, a strategic alliance that would allow us to have a partner in the South that would break China's grip on the global South. China's whole strategy, their Belt and Road Initiative, their whole entire geopolitical ambition is dependent on capturing the global South. And they capture them through economic coercion, they capture them through subversion, they capture them basically just through bullying these weaker countries into bending to their political will. Well, the way you break that is you capture those partners away from them. So we lost the opportunity with Brazil, but we can relive that opportunity with Argentina if Javier Miel or Patricia Bullrich, I don't want to discount her either because she's also a right-of-center pro-U.S., pro-Western Democratic candidate in the country. So if either one of those candidates win, they have a potential to both to go into the second round, then the United States has another chance to rewrite the wrongs of the Western Hemisphere with a solid partner on this side of the world that will break China's grip.
Well, that just sounds like an incredible opportunity. Do you have any predictions of what might happen on October 22nd? So I won't hold you to it. But.
Yeah, and I'll tell people don't put any money on my predictions. They haven't always been the right. Look, I predict that Javier Miel will go to the second round at the minimum. He has a potential to win the first round. Argentina has one of these systems where you don't just need a 50+1 majority. You can have 40% as long as you're 10% above your next competitor. He's at 35% right now, so he's 5 points away. But I would say my biggest prediction for Argentina is you're going to see a lot of political instability. I would hope that either Javier Miel or Patricia Bullrich become the next president of the country because they're pro-U.S., because they have strong stances against China, because they have ambitions to fix the economy and the insecurity in the country. But most importantly, I think is they have to be ready for the onslaught because it's not going to go away. This is what happened with President Bolsonaro. He won the election. We were very celebratory. I was here. You were probably in the White House I went to the state dinner when he visited the United States in March of 2019, first official state visit, and everything was great until the pandemic, and then they pretty much slaughtered President Bolsonaro. The same thing is going to happen to whoever is Javier Miel or Patricia Bullrich, and so they have to get their alliances in check to be able to ready for this onslaught. Because Latin America, unfortunately, most of the region is going towards a Marxist, authoritarian direction, and if Argentina is able to break away from that trend, the challenge will be, will they able to consolidate their alliances so that they can resist and have a successful term in office?
I think that's a great concluding point, that the United States, and particularly conservatives in the United States, need to be ready to support whoever the next president of Argentina is, to understand why this is such a vitally important potential alliance for the United States, and to be fully supportive of this future partner. So, Joe, I can't thank you enough for coming in and literally explaining this to us, and I hope you come back after October 22nd and tell us what next steps are.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you to Victoria Coates and Joseph Humire for contributing to today's show. You can find Victoria on X, formerly Twitter, at Victoria Coates, and Joseph at JM Humire. That's Humire. You can find commentary by both of them at heritage.org. And thank you, as always, for listening to Heritage Explains. If you have any thoughts, feedback, or suggestions for future episodes, send them our way at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Heritage Explains is brought to you by more than 500,000 members of the Heritage Foundation. It's written and produced by Mark Gagne, Lauren Evans, and John Popp.